How much of your entire fortune have you ever lost? Here's a story about someone who lost 95% of his wealth after reaching the top spot as the world's richest person, but then came back to become Japan's richest man again. That's Masayoshi Son, or Son Jung. At one point, he had invested in 20% of the world's 1,000 unicorn companies, demonstrating the significant impact of his influence in the global startup scene. Today's lesson is about the life of Masayoshi Son, the founder of SoftBank, who was born as a third-generation Korean Japanese and grew up facing poverty and discrimination. He's been through being the wealthiest man and nearly bankrupt several times, earning a reputation as the world's top risk-taker. His story starts with Yasumoto Masayoshi. Born in 1917 in Daegu during the Japanese occupation, the Japanese army took his family's farmland, and as a boy, he ended up in Kyushu, Japan. Son Jung began working in coal mines in the Chikuho area, later becoming a tenant farmer. He met and married a 14-year-old Korean girl named Lee Won-jo, who had come to Japan from Gangwon Province. In 1936, their son, Son Sam-hyun, also known by his Japanese name Yasumoto Mitsunori, was born. In 1945, after the U.S. dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan surrendered unconditionally. The Son family had to decide whether to stay in Japan or go back to Korea. The so-called Zainichi Koreans living in Japan faced even worse discrimination than before, reminding everyone of the empire's downfall. To survive, they chose to return to Korea. They went back to Daegu, Son Jung's hometown. But their relatives treated them harshly.
How can someone from a respectable family like the Sons be doing business and begging? You're a disgrace to the family.
The relatives smashed their belongings and caused chaos. In the end, they had no choice but to return to Japan and settle in a Korean slum in Kyushu. This place was a hub for bootleggers, loan sharks, and yakuza, part of a shadow economy where even the police rarely dared to go. The mother, Lee Won-jo, sold fish and vegetables, while her son, Mitsunori, dropped out of school and made money selling bootleg liquor. In 1957, Mitsunori's son was born on a nameless dirt road in that area, Yasumoto Masayoshi. When his parents went out to work, Masa would stay with his grandmother, collecting leftover food from local restaurants to feed the pigs. Masa was walking home from kindergarten when he got hit by a stone thrown by some Japanese kids, and he started bleeding. In Japan, Korean residents faced discrimination and contempt, and that's when Masa realized he wasn't considered Japanese. He learned what nationality meant and what discrimination was, all in the land of McDonald's. Masa's dad started making money by selling pigs, and in 5 years, he earned 40 million yen. Using that money, he got into loan sharking and expanded into the pachinko business. After the war, pachinko became extremely popular among people of all ages in Japan, and since it was somewhat in a legal gray area, many Korean residents became involved. Mitsunori's business, called Lions, opened over a dozen branches and generated approximately $500,000 in monthly sales. Thanks to that, he was able to drive foreign cars and support 20 relatives, and Masa grew up living a wealthy childhood. When Masa was a kid, he dreamed of becoming a middle school teacher. However, when he discovered that this was impossible due to his nationality, he was crushed. His parents told him to aim to become the president of Korea instead. Masa wants to become a businessman, and he focuses on one person, a legendary figure in post-war Japan and the founder of McDonald's Japan, Den Fujita. Masa begged Fujita's office to meet him on the phone, but it didn't work out. As a middle schooler, he boarded a plane and flew to Tokyo, arriving directly in front of Fujita's office.
"Please tell Mr. Fujita," he said.
"I don't need to talk, and you can keep doing what you're doing. I want to see you for 3 minutes.
Touched by this, Fujita gladly met with Masa. Masa asked him what kind of business he should get into, and Fujita replied,
"Computers. The future is all about the computer industry. And learn English."
That summer of 1973, during his middle school summer break, Masa enrolled in a 6-week language course at the University of California, Berkeley. Seeing white, black, and Asian students hanging out naturally and using their real ethnic names shocked him deeply. When he returned to Japan, he told everyone that he planned to continue studying in the US. Then he made a big announcement.
"From now on, I won't go by the Japanese surname, Yasumoto, anymore. I'm going to live with the Korean surname, Son."
His parents knew it was impossible to change Masa's stubborn mind, so they allowed him to study abroad. Masa enrolled at Sarah High School in San Francisco, and just a few days later, he fell head over heels for a Japanese girl with a dazzling smile. That girl was Masami Ono, whom he would eventually marry. Masa decided he wanted to enter the same university as her that same year, and just a week after starting school, He went to see the principal.
I want to start college as soon as possible. Please let me skip a grade.
This was unheard of in Japan, where rules are strict, but America was different. Impressed by Masa's determination, the principal went a step further and allowed him to skip 2 grades. Thanks to that, Masa could take the college entrance exam right away and graduated from high school just a month after enrolling. In 1975, Masa started college at Holy Names University in Oakland. The drive from school to Silicon Valley was only about an hour. Masa drives the Porsche his dad bought him and heads over here. Then, a top-notch Japanese engineer visits Silicon Valley. Sasaki Tadashi, known as the Rocket Doctor, joined Sharp, a huge Japanese electronics company, and developed the world's first electronic calculator. When Masa met Sasaki, he didn't waste time and said,
I'm a Korean living in Japan, and I came to America because I want to build a proper business.
Impressed by Masa's boldness, Sasaki gave him lots of advice. And over the next 40 years, whenever Masa hit a rough patch, Sasaki was there to help. After spending 2 years at Holy Names, Masa transferred to UC Berkeley, majoring in economics and computer science. His only focus was,
how do I make money?
He jotted down new invention ideas for 5 minutes every day and came up with 250 ideas in a year. From those, he picked the one with the best business potential, a speech-to-text translator. Masa immediately started digging through the Berkeley faculty phonebook to find the right person to help him. He went to see Professor Forrest Moser, a top expert in satellite orbit programming at the time.
We're going to set up kiosks at airports and rent portable voice translators to incoming passengers.
Moser, impressed by Masa's passion and business idea, decided to help develop a prototype. That night, he told his wife,
that guy's going to take over Japan someday.
Masa convinced Hong Lu, who was studying in Taiwan, to start the business with him. They sent letters to 50 Japanese electronics companies to demo their prototype, but everyone ignored them. Finally, Masa asked Sasaki for help, got a meeting with Sharp, and demonstrated the device without a hint of nervousness. Dr. Sasaki realized that this talking translator could have huge potential if combined with Sharp's line of portable calculators, and bought the patent for $1 million. Right after that, Masa started working on his second business idea, video games, which were booming in arcades across the US at the time. Masa personally visited restaurants and bars to negotiate the installation of game machines, and within 6 months, he imported 350 units, generating a profit of $200,000. As graduation approached, Masa delivered some shocking news to Lu. Because of a promise to my parents, I have to go back to Japan after graduation. So, Masa left the company he had started in the US and returned to Japan in 1980. Back in Japan, Drive. Sasaki offered Masa the position of head of Sharp's R&D center, but Masa declined it. He spent a year and a half organizing about 40 different business ideas and recalled the advice Fujita had given him back in middle school. At that time, NEC had just launched the PC 8001, marking the beginning of the PC era in Japan. But Masa thought he couldn't be number one in hardware distribution, so he shifted his focus to PC software instead. In the early 1980s, software such as spreadsheets, word processors, and video games began to emerge, but from a consumer's perspective, it was unclear what software was available. There were no stores or catalogs you could just glance at. Masa, a university professor with a special interest in personal computers, and Kazuo Noda, a management guru, teamed up and each invested 10 million yen to co-found SoftBank Japan, a company specializing in software distribution under Noda's company, MRI. A few weeks later, Masa took on a new challenge. At the annual electronics show in Osaka, he rented the biggest booth and invited software vendors from all over Japan to join for free. A large number of visitors showed up at Masa's booth, but not a single vendor signed a dealership contract. Although SoftBank Japan utilized 80% of its capital, it only sold about $3,000 worth of software. Shocked by this, MRI declared they were pulling out and selling their shares. But Masa's move wasn't reckless. The president of Joshin Denki, a major Japanese electronics retailer, reached out for a meeting. Drawn in by young Masa's boldness, the Joshin Denki president signed an exclusive contract with SoftBank to supply American PC software. Masa quickly signed an exclusive deal with Hudson Soft, Japan's most prominent software developer at the time. In just 2 years, SoftBank grew from a tiny 3-person startup into Japan's top software distributor, with 75 employees and a 75% market share. But working 7 days a week was the norm, and Masa often spent nights on office sofas or sleeping bags. He began to feel extremely exhausted and drained. After a health checkup, he was diagnosed with hepatitis B. The doctor told him, "You probably have only 1 to 2 years left to live, maybe up to 5 at most." Back then, there was no cure for hepatitis B, and Masa would cry himself to sleep every night in the hospital, wondering,
why do I have to die at a time like this?
Then one day, Masa's father found an interesting article in the newspaper. A doctor in Tokyo had developed a breakthrough treatment for hepatitis. Masa rushed to see the doctor and began treatment. 4 months later, his antigen levels dropped to normal, and 2 years after that, he fully recovered from hepatitis B. Even while undergoing treatment, Masa continued to work on finding new business ideas. What caught my eye was the telecom market. Back then, Japan's telecom scene was dominated by NTT, but regulations were starting to loosen up. The issue was that rates varied by region and company, and customers had to dial extra numbers to use the cheapest line. Masa developed a system called NCC Box that, while using the same number, automatically identifies the most affordable line. He even got a patent for it. After that, he started looking for an engineer to build it and met Sakano, who was being treated for chronic hepatitis at the same hospital. Sakano said he could have it done in 2 months, but Masa pushed for 3 weeks. The two of them worked on the project in their hospital gowns, right in their hospital room, and completed it. They sold the NCC box for 2 billion yen in royalties. When it came to going global, US software companies wanted to crack the Japanese market, with its over 100 million people and wealthy consumers. But most Americans didn't speak a word of Japanese, and all they knew about Japan was the Pearl Harbor attack. That's where Masa came in. He spoke English and controlled the sales channels. It was the only gateway into the Japanese market. Microsoft chose SoftBank as its distributor in Japan, and later Sun Microsystems, Lotus, and IBM followed suit. Masa also established SoftBank Venture Capital to invest in startups, putting money into companies like Microsoft and Cisco, which were still in their early stages back then. In 1990, Masa made 2 big moves. First, to expand globally instead of just focusing on Japan, he changed the company name from SoftBank Japan to SoftBank. Then, 5 months later, he became a Japanese citizen. The Japanese government wanted him to register under a Japanese name, Yasumoto Masayoshi, saying there were no son family names in Japan. But Masa refused, saying, dropping your family name means denying your ancestors. So he naturalized with the Korean surname intact as Son Masayoshi. In July 1994, SoftBank went public on Japan's JASDAQ stock exchange. The stock price jumped 70% from the offering price, and at 36 years old, Masa's net worth surpassed $2 billion, making him one of the wealthiest people in Japan. And based on that massive amount of money, they started investing in American companies. Back in 1995, internet search companies like AltaVista, Excite, and Lycos were emerging, and Marissa decided to invest in Yahoo, which was founded by Stanford graduate students Jerry Jung and David Filo. When Marissa visited Yahoo's cramped and messy office near the Stanford campus, she asked,
"What's your company's valuation?"
The founders hesitated and replied,
"About $40 million. Marissa said, "Great. Let's make a deal."
3 months later, she returned and stated that she wanted to invest $100 million at a $300 million valuation to acquire an additional 1/3 stake. But Yahoo, which was already preparing for an IPO, rejected the offer. Marissa fired back,
"When I'll invest in your competitor, Excite, and crush you."
Ultimately, Yahoo accepted Marissa's investment. The deal also included Yahoo setting up Yahoo Japan, with Marissa covering all the costs and getting 60% ownership of Yahoo Japan in return. In April 1996, Yahoo went public on the US stock market, and Masa made a cool $100 million just from investing in Yahoo. Alibaba. At the end of the 20th century, China was the last frontier of the global economy. In 1995, Masa visited China for the first time. He believed there were investment opportunities everywhere, saying you could smell money anywhere in China, and at the center of it all was the internet. He was convinced that tens of millions of consumers would flock to the online forum. Platform 9. During a meeting that lasted only 6 minutes, Masa made the biggest bet of his life. At a venture investment meeting hosted by SoftBank, several Chinese entrepreneurs were invited, including Jack Ma. Alibaba, a platform connecting buyers and sellers, was only 6 months old and barely making any profit. But Masa saw the opportunity in just a few minutes of Jack Ma's presentation, and he was drawn to the hunger he saw in Ma's eyes. While other SoftBank partners didn't trust Jack Ma, Masa saw himself in Ma's youthful ambition and unyielding drive, ignoring all the opposition. Masa asked Ma Yun for 49% of Alibaba's shares for $40 million, but Ma Yun said no. Then Masa offered $20 million for 40%, but it was turned down again. After a few back and forths, they finally made a deal where Masa got 30% of Alibaba for $20 million. In 2002, Alibaba launched its B2C service under the brand Taobao, and Masa increased his investment to $100 million. Alibaba also introduced Alipay, an online payment service, which helped it become the leading IT group in China. In September 2014, Alibaba went public on the New York Stock Exchange, and SoftBank's 32% stake in Alibaba was worth a staggering $70 billion. By the end of 2020, that value had grown to $210 billion. The wealthiest person in the world. Between 1995 and 2000, during the dot-com bubble, there was a massive hype around internet companies, and Masa was right at the center of it. At the end of 1995, SoftBank Technology Ventures opened in California, and in its first year alone, it invested $230 million in 56 companies. In 1996, he raised a $300 million venture fund, and in 1998, a $600 million one, making considerable investments in American internet companies. Masa invested a total of $1.7 billion in over 100 internet companies, allocating approximately $1 billion to just 8 publicly traded ones. Thanks to this, the Nasdaq continued to soar. His reputation in Japan was also growing. After Japan's bubble economy burst and the country fell into a slump, he was like a breath of fresh air. The many companies he acquired, centered around Yahoo Japan, came to account for about 70% of Japan's internet economy. In March 2000, with dot-com companies experiencing a surge, Masa overtook Bill Gates to become the world's wealthiest person. But just 3 days later, the dot-com bubble burst. The Nasdaq index dropped nearly 25% in just 1 month. SoftBank's stock price was cut in half, and over the next 2 years, it plummeted almost 99%. Masa's fortune, which had been around $76 billion, shrank down to about $3.2 billion, a loss of roughly 95%. That's how Masa ended up being the person with one of the most significant losses in history. After SoftBank Mobile.com collapsed, Masa disappeared without a trace. No one at the company saw him, and all his meetings were cancelled. Everyone mocked him, calling him a failure. But he hadn't given up or lost hope. He was gearing up to make a new bet, putting the whole company on the line. He planned to bring high-speed internet all across Japan. At the time, telecom regulations in Japan were loosening up, and Masa aimed to break into broadband and mobile communications. SoftBank sold off stakes in several companies it owned and used that money to launch a broadband company called Yahoo BB. Yahoo BB set internet rates at about half the cost of its competitors, and Masa worked 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, investing billions of yen. Still, breaking NTT's monopoly wasn't easy, and losses continued to pile up. Then an opportunity came. Vodafone Japan, the country's third-largest mobile carrier with 15 million customers, was up for sale. SoftBank bought it for $17 billion and rebranded it as SoftBank Mobile. SoftBank quickly became a major player in Japan's telecom market by owning the broadband service, Yahoo BB, and the mobile carrier, SoftBank Mobile. SoftBank Mobile used a white dog from the Hokkaido breed called Otosan as its mascot, and its TV ads were a huge hit, causing subscriptions to skyrocket. The baseball team they bought in 2005, the Fukuoka Hawks, was renamed the Fukuoka SoftBank Hawks. In spring 2006, Japan was on the verge of introducing number portability, which would allow cell phone users to switch carriers without changing their phone numbers. SoftBank Mobile needed a strong move to beat competitors like NTT and KDDI, and Masayoshi Son's longtime friend came through with a game-changer: Steve Jobs and the iPhone. Jobs and Masayoshi both sensed that the internet was about to change everything, and they often discussed their visions together. After being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, Jobs delayed surgery, which allowed the cancer to spread to his liver. Although he told the public he was cured, he knew his time was limited. And then he decided to pour what little time was left into 2 secret projects: the iPhone and the iPad. In the summer of 2005, Masa visited California and pitched an idea to Jobs.
How about making a mobile device with a big screen running Apple's OS that can handle data and images? Jobs just smiled and said, "We're already working on that."
He didn't provide any further details, and Masa requested exclusive distribution rights in Japan once the product was released. A year later, in 2006, Masa bought Vodafone Japan, and 2 weeks after meeting Jobs again, he said,
"I took a $17 billion gamble based on what you told me, so you're responsible too." Jobs laughed and said, "You're crazy. All right, I get it."
In 2007, rumors circulated that Apple would launch a 3G iPhone, prompting all these carriers to scramble for distribution rights. Jobs stuck to a long-standing promise with a friend, and in June 2008, SoftBank announced it would have exclusive rights to sell the iPhone. Thanks to that, SoftBank Mobile's market share shot up, despite the financial crisis and bankruptcy. In 2008, just as SoftBank was reaching its peak in dominating the telecom market, the global financial market started to wobble. Investment banks had poured too much money into MBS, which were then transformed into structured products like CDOs and sold as safe, high-yield investments. SoftBank was among those investors. They put 75 billion yen into a CDO trust product recommended by Goldman Sachs. In September 2008, when Wall Street's leading investment bank, Lehman Brothers, filed for bankruptcy, the financial market descended into chaos. Rumors began circulating in Tokyo after banned SoftBank incurred losses. In reality, Masa's debts exceeded the value of his SoftBank shares, and he was bankrupt. To pay off his debts, he had to sell a significant portion of his SoftBank stake, and the company itself introduced debt reduction promises and various policies to calm the market. As a result, Masa lost most of his fortune again. Following the dot-com bubble, he managed to survive again. Masa Arm caught the eye of a British company when he acquired Vodafone Japan. That company was Arm. Arm specialized in ultra-fast, low-power semiconductor design, and since most mobile devices used chips designed by Arm, it held over 95% of the global mobile phone market. Masa had been keeping an eye on Arm for more than a decade and firmly believed this company would be key to the next stage of the digital revolution. In July 2016, Masa met with Arm's CEO and expressed his interest in acquiring the company. Honestly, from Arm's perspective, this was the best offer they could get. Just weeks earlier, Brexit had been decided, and with the UK burning bridges with Europe, they desperately needed friendly foreign investors. Following the offer, just 2 weeks later, Arm's board accepted SoftBank's $32 billion all-cash acquisition proposal. Vision Fund Masa made a 50-year life plan when he was 19. In his 20s, he aimed to make a name for himself. In his 30s, he planned to secure at least 100 billion yen in capital. In his 40s, he took a significant risk with his business. In his 50s, he founded a company that generated 1 trillion yen in revenue annually. By his 60s, he planned to pass the business on to the next generation. Amazingly, everything in his life went precisely according to plan up to his 50s, and all that was left was the final stage in his 60s retirement. But he was still hungry for more. The day before the shareholders' meeting in July 2016, he announced he was calling off his retirement and would keep working for another 10 years. Having poured too much money into acquiring Arm, he looked for someone to help him realize his dream. Middle Eastern countries, flush with oil money and eager to reform their oil-dependent economies, had plenty of cash but lacked connections to Silicon Valley. When he heard this, he sensed an opportunity. That's how the SoftBank Vision Fund was born. He first visited Doha, Qatar, and met with the Qatar Investment Authority, which decided to invest $3 billion. Next, he set his sights on Saudi Arabia, led by Mohammed bin Salman. After meeting with Saudi ministers, he said,
"How many people lose 98% of their fortune and still come back?"
Saudi Arabia, led by bin Salman, also decided to invest $45 billion. The UAE's sovereign wealth fund put in $15 billion, and even the conservative Apple invested $2 billion. So, in October 2016, the $100 billion Vision Fund was launched. This massive amount of money sparked a global startup boom. The worst investment failure. In 2016, Donald Trump defeated Hillary Clinton in the U.S. presidential election. Masa promised to meet the president-elect at Trump Tower. Before heading there, he agreed to visit a startup he was interested in, WeWork. After a 12-minute tour of the headquarters, Masa asked WeWork's CEO, Adam, to ride with him to Trump Tower so they could talk. He took out his iPad and wrote down how much he wanted to invest.
$4.4 billion investment at a $20 billion valuation. Masa signed it and emailed it to Adam.
Thanks to the $4.4 billion from the Vision Fund, WeWork experienced explosive growth, but due to reckless expansion, the losses grew significantly. Adam went back to Martha again, asking for even more money. "If you give me $70 billion, we can dominate not just the office market but apartments too." But instead of kicking him out for his crazy talk, Martha rolled out the red carpet for him. With a company valuation of $47 billion, they secured an additional $20 billion in investment. Everyone at SoftBank was against it, but Martha just smiled.
"Weren't you all against me when I invested in Alibaba?" she said. "To me, WeWork looks like a second Alibaba."
However, even Saudi Arabia, the largest investor in the Vision Fund, opposed the additional investment. Plus, SoftBank Mobile's IPO failed miserably, so Martha had no choice but to invest only $1 billion in WeWork. In October 2019, when WeWork's IPO fell through, the company suffered a significant collapse. Its value dropped from $47 billion to $8 billion, and Adam Neumann was kicked out. SoftBank ultimately invested $9.5 billion in WeWork. They ultimately owned 80% of a failing company. The Vision Fund generated significant returns by investing in companies such as Arm, Coupang, Didi, DoorDash, and ByteDance. But most of its other investments were less successful. Within SoftBank, discipline surrounding investment decisions broke down, and managers frustrated with this development began leaving the company. By the end of 2019, SoftBank's total debt had ballooned to a staggering $177 billion, making it one of the most indebted companies globally. They attempted to raise $100 billion for Vision Fund 2 but only managed to secure $30 billion. Then came the blow that shook SoftBank to its core: the outbreak of the novel coronavirus in Wuhan, China, which quickly spread worldwide. SoftBank's stock price plummeted by almost 50%, and Masayoshi Son, who had taken out loans using his SoftBank shares as collateral, suffered a significant loss. If the stock price dropped any further, margin calls could have forced him into bankruptcy again. To defend against the stock slide, SoftBank started selling off $41 billion worth of assets. They announced a $18 billion stock buyback plan. Planned investments were canceled one after another, and startups that counted on that funding went bankrupt. On May 17, 2020, SoftBank reported a record annual loss of $12.5 billion. However, as governments around the world rolled out policies to mitigate the economic impact, the stock market stabilized, and SoftBank stocks surged again. Masayoshi Son pulled off another great escape: the Nasdaq whale. In the summer of 2020, as the global stock market rebounded sharply and tech stocks surged, Masayoshi, caught up in FOMO, formed a trading team to invest in listed stocks. The SB Northstar trading team used both SoftBank's and Masayoshi's personal funds to buy Nasdaq tech stocks, and they made highly leveraged plays, utilizing call options and futures contracts. When this mysterious Nasdaq whale began buying billions of dollars worth of call options, the stock market surged. In August 2020 alone, Tesla jumped 74%, Apple rose 21%, Alphabet increased by 10%, and Amazon gained 9%. The Nasdaq continued to soar, and Massa's trading team reaped a whopping $7 billion in profits. SoftBank's top execs were over the moon and celebrated, but the traders handling the trades were on the verge of tears, begging to stop. Still, Masa, drunk on the profits, wouldn't slow down. A few days later, on September 4, 2020, the Financial Times revealed that SoftBank was the whale driving the Nasdaq surge. In the stock market, having a massive position exposed is like bleeding in front of sharks. Once the whale's identity was revealed, the market began to move in the opposite direction. Within weeks, the trading team lost $9 billion, ultimately closing their position with a $2 billion. Then, in October 2020, top Communist Party officials, regulators, and major corporations all attended a financial seminar in Shanghai. Jack Ma openly criticized China's financial regulations in a speech, saying, "China's leadership is suffocating innovation with these financial rules." That turned out to be the worst mistake of his life. A few days later, he was summoned by the China Securities Regulatory Commission and received a severe reprimand. Alibaba's mobile payment arm, Ant Financial, was gearing up for an IPO with a $300 billion valuation, but the plans were called off. They also got hit with a $2.7 billion fine for antitrust violations. Because the IPO was cancelled, Jack Ma lost approximately $37 billion, and Masayoshi Son also took a significant hit, as Alibaba accounted for over half of SoftBank's market value. At the time, SoftBank owned a third of Alibaba's shares. SoftBank's big bet on Greensill Capital also turned sour. Greensill, a supply chain finance startup, was valued at $3.5 billion, and SoftBank had invested $1.5 billion, in addition to pouring hundreds of millions into Greensill-related funds at Credit Suisse. But when COVID hit and businesses struggled, Greensill went bankrupt, and SoftBank lost all its money. After Greensill's collapse and the Bill Wong scandal, Credit Suisse also fell apart. On top of that, COVID-19 froze the real economy, causing many startups that SoftBank had invested in to go under. The 2022 war between Russia and Ukraine caused energy prices to skyrocket, sparking inflation and prompting the US Fed to continue raising interest rates. This marked the end of SoftBank's strategy of using massive debt to make huge investments during 30 years of low interest rates. Vision Fund 1, which aimed for a 30% annual return, barely hit single digits, and Vision Fund 2 was mired in losses. In November 2022, Masa took the stage to announce earnings, looking downcast. Then he dropped a bombshell.
"From now on, I won't be discussing earnings or strategy. CFO Goto will handle all announcements."
And just like that, Masa vanished from the public eye. After Masa disappeared, people mocked him as a failure. But he wasn't gone for good. Just like after the dot-com bubble and the financial crisis, he was secretly gearing up for a big comeback. The arrival of ChatGPT signaled the start of the AI era, and right at the center of it was the company he had acquired. There was ARM. In the summer of 2023, Masa came out with the biggest IPO of the year, the ARM listing. Major global tech giants, including Apple, Google, AMD, Intel, Foxconn, and Samsung, all jumped in. The value of ARM, which had been acquired for $32 billion in 2016, surpassed $140 billion by early 2024. SoftBank, holding 90% of ARM's shares, hit the jackpot. But that's not all. Hooked on ChatGPT and AI, Masa invested $500 million in OpenAI in October 2024 and plans to pump in $40 billion more in 2025. He also teamed up with OpenAI Sam Altman and Oracle's Larry Ellison to launch an AI joint venture called Stargate, announcing a massive $500 billion investment. From growing up in a humble shack to amassing around $30 billion and becoming one of Japan's wealthiest men, Masayoshi's high-stakes gamble on the world keeps rolling as time allows him. I will come back with more interesting life story of billionaires.